In this segment, we're going to be sharing a little bit of updates about Farm.One, as well as some vertical farming and industry news that we are really excited about or that we find interesting. Michael, do you want to start us off with some of the industry updates that you have?
Yeah, let's do that. So the first story that I want to talk about and get everyone's input on and their take actually came out at the end of last month in the Financial Times, the FT. They published a story that was titled "Vertical Farming: Hype, Hope or Hype." And it feels like with every industry, that's out there that's coming up, and there's a ton of hype around it. The natural news cycle tends to be, within a few years of some success and some notoriety. There's always the counter story. This is hype. This is all going to go away. So this was an interesting story and felt kind of timely. And even though it came out a little over a week ago, I figured, since we skipped last week's podcast, this is a pretty important story in our industry, right? So the premise of the story, and we touched on this a little bit last week when we talked about Driscoll's investment in Plenty, is you've got on the one hand all of this investment that's going in, and they're citing, of course, almost $2 billion in investment in vertical farming and ag tech since 2014. On the one hand, you've got all of that, and entrepreneurs and investors are talking about the promise of efficiency, of how environmentally friendly and all of this stuff is. And then on the other hand, you've got I wouldn't say they're naysayers, maybe they're realists in some respects, where they're starting to talk about, well, productivity isn't really what a lot of entrepreneurs and vertical farms are quite talking about. It's going to take a while. It's still really expensive. There's still a lot of capital that needs to go in. It's not the cure-all, right? So here's the question. Is there hope in this? Is this going to change the food system? Are we all going to be looking at people like Justin in the future as the titans of industry? Or is it just hype, right? Is it going to go the way of, the usual sort of Betamax and other things that we point to in the industry? What do you guys think?
Well, Betamax was a superior technology, by the way. So, but I mean, I think my opinion in some extent. I think it's going to take quite a bit of time for a lot of these companies to get to profitability, and some investors are going to have the patience for that. Some companies are just going to die on the way. Building vertical farms at a large scale is a really expensive proposition, and it really seems like none of these bigger companies are anywhere close to profitability yet. I think that, and as mentioned in the article, and it's a good article to read, I think, as mentioned in the article, I think one of the worries is that there are just too many outlandish claims from the vertical farming industry. Like, companies tend to say, like, oh, we're completely clean, we have no emissions, we have completely local food, all this kind of stuff. And I think a lot of companies are just pushing it a bit too far with the PR, and it would be better as an industry if we just get more realistic about what's going on. So, the power that we use is quite significant. The expense and the labor involved in running these farms is pretty significant. And so, it'd be better for us to just become more realistic. I know that's a bit difficult when companies are trying to raise money, they're trying to get investors excited. But in the long term, being realistic and straightforward about the shortcomings of your company and the difficulties, that's going to be a more promising thing. And I think we've got to do that as an industry so that, customers and investors don't just after a while, like, say, hey, you guys are all full of shit, So that's my take on it. I don't know. I mean, Justin, what do you think? Like, as someone who actually lives and works on a vertical farm, like, every day, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you, Rob, in that there is a lot that we can do to improve the way we operate here. There's a lot of, it's still pretty expensive to build a farm. We can find more efficiencies, but that's kind of what we're focusing on. I don't come into work every day trying to disrupt the entire, world's food supply and farming and that sort of thing. So, I think we're making a lot of gains here at Farm.One. kind of piece by piece. And we're going to just keep focusing on that, making our operation more efficient, more consistent, and putting out a better product and better yields.
I think
I,
there's
you know, oh, go ahead, Michael. Sorry.
no, sorry, go on.
I don't think that the future of farming and agriculture is going to be vertical farming only. I think that there's going to be success in certain use cases for vertical farming, but the future of food is not going to be just this industry. And so I think that it's really important for this industry to find out where there is opportunity for them to solve some serious problems in the food space.
Yeah, I could totally agree. And like, I think one of the things is a lot of these companies right now don't want to say no. So someone will come to them and they'll say, hey, could we grow wheat, or could we grow, jackfruit or something, right? And some of these companies are sort of, they're toying with investors and people and saying like, yeah, we could do that in a few years time, or we could do blueberries, or we could do this. And it's like, actually, like, let's look realistically at what we would be able to grow in 10 years. It's not those things. It's going to be leafy greens. It's going to be some fruit, probably strawberries. I don't know if you've got other ideas about what might be viable, but like, it's not wheat, it's not soy, it's not corn, it's not these big sort of difficult things.
It's not going to be commodity crops. We could do peppers. We could start to do like small fruits and that sort of thing. I think pretty easily, but it's not top of our list to do big commodity crops.
Yeah.
So to Ina's point, what does I guess the future of farming look like then? Right. So right now, something like 50% of the organics in the US come out of California. We've seen over this summer some of the problems that we're facing and the environmental impacts of climate change. They're running into water issues from the Colorado River drying up. What happens there? When we think of the entire picture of what we do as an indoor vertical farm, but then there's the greenhouse aspect of controlled environment agriculture. And then, of course, there's still field farming that's happening. Let's say in the near term, over the next 5 years or so, how does that begin to shape up, do you think?
Well, I think vertical farming is definitely part of the answer to that. But I think you're going to start to see folks come up with all sorts of solutions, especially in places like California and throughout the West and Midwest, where you have a lot of families that have been into farming for a long time and being, kind of forced to change the way that they do things, especially the younger generations. So for some of them, it's going to be getting into vertical farming. Some of them, it's going to be using other sort of, methods to produce crops, produce the crops that they've been producing for a long time. So I think it's part of that.
Yeah, I think that, people often forget that agriculture as a whole has so many different types of agriculture going on. You've got orchards, you've got animal husbandry, you've got leafy greens, you've got, my parents used to grow olives, right? Completely different kind of farming. And so this technology is suitable, for a particular subset of crops and also a particular subset of situations. I think what is sort of really interesting and just doesn't get talked about that much is it is viable with vertical farming for a farmer who may be growing just 1 or 2 crops outdoors to build a small vertical farming facility that can then serve their local community in a way that they just haven't been able to previously. So if you look at someone growing, let's say corn, in the Midwest, it just wouldn't really be viable for them to try to grow like a spinach or a leafy green otherwise. But to have like a small greenhouse or a small vertical farming structure that could, help them serve their local community with some fresh produce is actually something that's pretty viable. And it's getting cheaper and cheaper. And I think that's the cool thing. And it's getting to be a technology which is accessible as well. And what we're hoping to do, I think, in addition to other companies, is just reduce that barrier to entry so that more and more people can do this stuff easily. I don't know if you agree with that, but like that's my sort of take on it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, the barrier to entry is kind of one of the big roadblocks right now, and that's one of the big things that we're tackling. So
yeah.
Yeah, and it's cost of the equipment and also the capital requirements, but also there's a knowledge base, right? There's talent, and I think That's one of the things I'm particularly interested in when we get into the discussion about Justin and what he does later. How do you develop and cultivate that talent? How does that happen, at scale? And I'm also keen to hear Ina as a tour guide, as somebody who started in this business and at Farm.One, getting people excited and interested about this. Curious sort of your take in terms of how we think about awareness and in the industry, job training, and all of that too.
What was the other news story that you found in the past week, Michael?
Yeah, so kind of along these lines, right? This theme of we're at a bit of an inflection point in the industry, or at least it feels like it, right? So there's a story this week that Italy, our good friends over there in the Flatiron, sort of premium grocery, or I guess you'd call them marketplace, signed a pretty big deal with Mercado, which is an e-commerce platform, to do same-day deliveries off of their platform. This kind of got really interesting for me when I coupled it with a story that came out of a research firm, an analyst firm in the UK called IGD, where they profiled what they're calling Generation P. At some stage, we got to run out of letters, but they call them the perennial shoppers. So they're people aged 50 to 64. They're looking at them as a $1.5 trillion grocery market. But it sort of made me kind of think about the way we're changing habits. Coming into COVID, it almost felt like everything about the world was really different. And now it's so much has changed, right? I mean, we've looked at the supply chain, we've had conversations about the supply chain and the food system, and now we're looking at changing buying patterns, how retailers and brands and suppliers need to think about things. Look at what we're doing, right? We're now selling direct to consumers. It's very high touch, very sort of close connection to the brand. Curious kind of how you guys, where vertical farming's place in all of this, and suppliers like us that are in neighborhoods and in communities. How should we be thinking about this?
Well, I think it's interesting when you think about Italy, right? Because previously a brand like that has used retail to, create its distribution channel and meet consumers, right? So spending a lot of money on prime locations in Flatiron here, downtown, very, very, very expensive real estate in order to get their brand across and also just actually meet the customer. Whereas what they're saying, or what they're sort of admitting now with COVID is, a significant amount of volume is going to be delivery. I can't actually get directly to my customer. I'm not capable of building up a delivery network or an online store experience and attract enough people. So I'm going to work with a partner like Mercado. Mercado being, I would, personally in my experience, not the greatest user experience. I don't know that many people who are like passionate Mercado shoppers. No, so maybe not the premier partner in that regard, but maybe a partner that's better for them to work with than say Amazon, where they might just lose all chance of kind of brand recognition, etc. So I think that if you look at that, that's kind of the way that Italy is going, and I hope that it's successful, but it does sort of look a little bit like capitulation to me. But I think in terms of like how that might fit in with us and producers and vertical farmers, I think one of the big questions about being any kind of producer is, am I a commodity producer, or am I creating a brand that customers recognize and I can leverage for higher margins, higher value? And of course, creating a brand is difficult. It costs a lot of money. It requires expertise. It's not always successful, and you don't always get that price premium that you expect. But I think that some vertical farms are definitely trying to go that right. They're trying to create brands that are recognizable. If you look at, for instance, Bowery, their brand name is all over that product. I don't know how much recognition they really have among customers. I don't know how many customers really in the grocery store are comparing salad brands, most of the time when I go to the grocery store, if I see salad, I go like, oh, I don't like that one. I don't like that one. I don't like that one, because the quality is generally not that great. But maybe it's possible. And I think that if you look, long term, you would expect that a lot of produce producers want to at least differentiate in the grocery store, because at the moment they can't. If you buy broccoli at Whole Foods, it's very unlikely that you're going to recognize the brand that's from, which of course means the grower is getting a lower price point because they're basically a replaceable commodity. And so I think that, you will see more farmers at least entering the market, entering new farmers going like, okay, I better create a brand for myself, otherwise I'm going to be commoditized. I think historically for farmers who've been growing for ages, that isn't necessarily an option. It's not necessarily going to be something that they can achieve if they're outside of a city, for instance. And so it's a tricky kind of landscape. But certainly the approach that we've taken, of course, is to try to create a brand and to try to create sort of local connection. But I think my last point to that would be, one of the problems with our food chain, right, is that the produce that we buy as consumers, sometimes we just don't know where it comes from, or it comes from a long way away. It comes from like not a real person. So we don't care how it was produced, if it was using pesticides, et cetera, et cetera. And so along with that need to create a brand, I think is this opportunity to create a local connection. And that's why, personally, I like the urban farming approach, because you can have a farm that is like literally very, very close to its customers. And so that concept of like what a brand is becomes, much more human. It's like, okay, it's not really a brand. It's Justin around the corner who I know is like a nice guy, and, he does it this way. So anyway, that was a long stream of opinion, Michael, but, I don't know if you guys want to chime in on that.
Yeah, just, thinking about delivery and same day delivery from the customer's perspective, I think probably most people, when they think about ordering groceries and produce and that sort of thing online, they're usually kind of, the first thing that pops into mind is the stores that they already shop at, or some of these bigger names. So I don't think that right now vertical farming pops into folks' minds. But as kind of Rob was getting at, with the bigger companies and the bigger retailers, you're not really getting the same sort of product. So I think there's a really big opportunity right now for vertical farmers, for urban farmers to kind of step in and play that role of the company that produces greens and herbs and flowers and that sort of thing in a very local setting, and delivers by bike, that sort of thing.
Did Eataly have a delivery model prior to this, or were they only retail?
I've definitely ordered from Eataly, but I think it was through Instacart.
I see.
Maybe. Yeah.
Because this change actually makes me more inclined to want to shop at Eataly, because I love the ingredients. I love the specialty products that they have.
I love the focaccia.
I love the focaccia. But the retail space was always really overwhelming for me, because it was such in high traffic places. I remember feeling there was just so many tourists, and I was overwhelmed by the amount of volume of people versus being able to focus on the ingredient experience. So I think that this kind of thing makes me more excited about shopping from Eataly.
I mean, this is the real test, right? Like if you put great ingredients behind a delivery service, then you're really saying, I have great ingredients. Like that's why I'm going to be chosen, and you take away that beautiful store experience, you take away the wine bar and like all this stuff, you're left with like, is this pasta sauce actually any better than what I'm going to get on Amazon? That's the test. Yeah.
Well, we'll find out.
All right.
Well, that's the news of this week.